Welcome to the Wednesday Yachting Luncheon, live from the virtual grow room of the St. Francis Yacht Club. I hope that you're safe and sound and sheltering in a comfortable environment. And we look forward to greeting you back at the Yacht Club just as soon as the pandemic is over. Now, while we're all at home, we're paying lots of attention to maybe the biggest story right after the pandemic, maybe bigger, and that is the election. The biggest question we all have in our heads is who won the election and what evidence can prove the winner. We have as our special guest today, Alex Stamos, cybersecurity expert and adjunct professor of the Election Integrity Partnership at Stanford University. Misinformation and disinformation can be used to disenfranchise voters and erode public confidence in the legitimacy of our or other people's elections. His partnership is a coalition of research entities and the research community, election officials, and social service organizations globally, endeavoring to get to the bottom of election integrity and be sure that we have what we can see as legitimate results. His organization is not a fact-checking partnership to debunk misinformation. Their objective is really to explicitly, get to the issue of election integrity. And we know Alex to be quite a thoughtful person, and this is quite an exciting activity that he's embraced on. So Alex, welcome to the Wednesday Yachting Luncheon. It's wonderful to see you here. And tell us all about the Election Integrity Partnership.
So the Election Integrity Partnership is 4 organizations, my team at the Stanford Internet Observatory, a private company in New York called Graphica, DFR Lab, which is part of the Atlantic Council in DC, and the University of Washington Center for Foreign and Informed Public. As Ron said, we provide we have about 120 people, and we've been both looking for election disinformation, as well as taking tips from local and state election officials and from CISA, which is the Cybersecurity Infrastructure Security Agency, which is a new cybersecurity agency that did not exist during the 2016 election, that was formed out of the cybersecurity components of the Department of Homeland Security. So we kind of are official partners with the US government and with local and state governments, and then less officially with a variety of civil service organizations. So what I thought I'd do is a quick overview of kind of the disinformation environment that we've seen. So I'm not going to talk about who I think won. I'm not an election lawyer. I'm a cyber guy, but I will talk about what election disinformation looked like and what we might expect from a number of different parties over the next couple of days. So this is from a report. If you're interested in any of this stuff, you can go to eipartnership.net and you can read our detailed analysis of disinformation, but also posts like this. This is a post we actually made before the election. We started operations in September, with those 120 people, what we were doing is running during election week, we were running 20 hours a day. So we started with like 2 shifts a day in September, and we slowly ramped up until we were 5 shifts, 20 hours a day of people who were both looking for disinformation and then doing analysis of who is behind it, what the themes are and the like. And so based upon our experience in September and October, we wrote something in late October about the kind of disinformation we expected to see on election day, in the immediate aftermath, and then over the couple of days. Kind of the expectation we had of, no matter who the winner was, of what was going to happen in the count was this thing called the blue shift, which is expected by a bunch of political scientists and something that we've seen for the last couple of years that was pretty clearly telegraphed to be a much bigger deal this year because of COVID. And the blue shift is the idea that on election night, you end up with voting counts that are artificially more Republican than the actual outcome is going to be. And that is due to mail-in voting, due to provisional voting, and for the fact that some very democratic states like California have laws that allow ballots to be sent in on election day. And so, in fact, I believe we had until like early this week for our ballots to show up at the various county counts if you had mailed your ballot on election day in California. And so this was always what we expected to happen. And then based upon the narratives of that, we kind of had predictions of the ways that people might spin election-related disinformation to delegitimize the fact that this was a well-known phenomenon that was expected to happen this entire time. So on election day, one interesting thing we saw is right out of the bat, you saw a focus on very specific states and a huge amount of focus on Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania was known to be a swing state. And so what we saw was a lot of the injection of ideas about the election being stolen in Pennsylvania that were either based upon complete inventions or an intentional misreading of actual evidence. On the left, this is a tweet that went big and then got a lot of coverage based upon one young man, something like 20 or 21 probably, on his Instagram account, created an Instagram story. So an Instagram story pops up and it's gone very quickly. And in this Instagram story said, I'm a poll station worker and I've been throwing away hundreds of Trump ballots. So this is something that our people saw because it was trending on Twitter. We reported it to the Pennsylvania officials and then the county officials in Erie, Pennsylvania. They confirmed for us that this nobody by this guy's name was volunteering or working for the polls. And that also in the way that they count their votes, that no single person would be in a place to just throw away ballots for anybody like that, right? Like you can't, as a poll worker, you don't know exactly how people are voting. There's no mechanism for you to do that without getting caught. And so we turned around and told the platforms and such, but by that point it had already gone big that the story, the guy ended up recanting because what he was basically saying was that he was committing a federal felony. Turns out something that you should generally not do on your Instagram account is to claim to do a felony that you didn't actually do. Like if you're gonna get caught for a crime, make it a crime that you did and that you benefited from somewhat, right? And so under questioning from local authorities, he very quickly recanted that this was a hoax, but that didn't stop other people from using evidence. On the right, this is a real photo of a ballot box being picked up by this guy. But it turns out that the way elections work is that the ballots are tracked electronically from step to step, that you know exactly who voted and how many votes should be in any place, but then they get counted sometimes by electrical scan ballots, by an electrical machine in the polling place itself, but they can also get counted in centralized locations. The people who are authorized to do this are just normal people with normal cars. We don't send, in this country, we have 8,000 local election authorities. We don't send armored cars with guns for people to go pick up ballot boxes. And so this picture of this guy picking up this ballot box was turned into evidence of something nefarious going on. And then the Pennsylvania state auditor said, yes, we have this ballot box tracked, this person tracked, we have the exact number of ballots that we were supposed to get. There's nothing wrong here, but that didn't stop it from going viral as evidence. So this is on election day. What you start to have is people lay down markers of here are the pieces of facts that are being injected that are going to be used as claims later. We also saw a lot of fake live stream content on the day. So live streaming is an interesting problem for the social media companies in that it's much harder to moderate, right? Like a live stream happens, it pops up, and then it's gone. And so you effectively have to be having somebody watch it in real time or have a computer watch it in real time that's very, very smart to figure out what's going on. This is a live stream that was posted, we think, not for any kind of political purpose. It was posted by a guy who's like has a pretty popular gaming streaming account. And what he did is he took a bunch of real video of protests that happened earlier this year, and he looped them around to make it look like there were all these crazy riots and protests going on across the country. None of this stuff really happened, right? But he effectively created this idea. And so he was able to get tens of thousands of viewers for the stream because people are like, whoa, this isn't being carried on the news. And so there's all this conspiratorial talk of the news. But if you watched carefully, what you'd see is that it would loop around and you'd see the same people doing the same things over and over again. There was some incitement to violence. This has actually worked out a little bit better than we expected, where people were trying to get folks to show up in polling places. Earlier in the day, what you had was people, especially in Philadelphia, who were showing up to polling places and saying, I'm an election monitor. In one case, they were authorized. They had the thing that said they're allowed to be there, but it didn't have the right polling place, and there's confusion of whether the person gets let in or not. In other cases, they just showed up, sometimes with guns. So here's a tip. Don't show up to a polling place with a gun and say you're an election monitor. That's not how it works, right? But people did this and they live streamed it. And then what you had is other people saying, or that person, hey, come, the election's being stolen, come show up, yada, yada. That can be very dangerous. Fortunately, there's no evidence of any of these situations actually turning out to be violent. So things kind of worked out positively. And a lot of the narratives about violence turned out to not get that big. And so that was actually a pleasant surprise for us, is that in our analysis, a bunch of the different things that were being pushed that could have led to riots or counter protests or people showing up with guns did not actually play out. What we did see, though, then was a number of different mathematical issues being used as evidence. And what we now see a lot of is people trying to portray issues that always exist or mistakes that were made by people who are not actually official as evidence of malfeasance. On the left, this is a photo that's going around a lot that shows these huge gains for Biden and saying this is malicious. Well, it turns out this was a mistake. This graph is not an official graph. These are not the official results from Michigan. This was from one media organization that media organization messed up when they put the numbers in, is that they put the Trump numbers in, they regenerated the graph, and then they typed the Biden numbers in. And so instead of seeing the curve go up simultaneously smoothly, you have these weird discontinuities. Again, a data entry issue on a media organization that has no actual impact. So this gets kind of reshared over and over again. On the right, like I said, it was always expected that there would be a blue shift. This was predicted by political scientists. This is a phenomenon that we have seen over and over and over again. It is also happening simultaneously around the country in both states won by both candidates and in states operated by both Democratic and Republican secretaries of state. But it is something that's happening much more this year, possibly because the president effectively told his supporters not to vote by mail, and Democrats made a huge push to vote by mail. In 6 states, in 6 states, the law does not allow them to open the envelopes on vote by mail until election day. And so in California, if you voted early, your envelope was opened, your ballot was removed. That's all an automated process. And then it was scanned and the result was recorded, but it wasn't tallied. So basically they pre-scanned everything in California that was sent in, but then they wouldn't add it up so that there was no numbers to leak out, because that's one of the things they're trying to do, is to make sure that there's nobody knows exactly who's winning, but they had it all recorded, and then they keep the ballots. The actual paper ballots have to be held for 22 months under California law, so that if there's a recount or something, that you can always go back to the paper evidence. And so that helps with it. But like in Pennsylvania, most importantly, the Republican-controlled assembly there voted to disallow the Secretary of State for doing that kind of pre-processing. So that guaranteed that we're going to have this blue shift afterwards. And then another interesting thing we saw is that you see the same narrative come up over and over again, but it chases what interesting things happening. So there's this tweet in Illinois of people saying that they're voting with Sharpies and that they're having problems voting, that it's bleeding through and stuff. Now, it looks like this person was legitimately concerned about voting with Sharpies, but then this idea that if you vote with a Sharpie or a pencil, like in the pencil in Connecticut, they came out and said because of COVID, they didn't want people sharing pens, so they gave people like the little pencils that you get at a golf course, but that the optical scan ballots would work fine. And then places like Maricopa County, what happened is, as Arizona became one of the key states, all of a sudden, this narrative that voting with Sharpies is some kind of conspiracy and some kind of trick to make your vote not count gets repurposed for Arizona, right? So this was not some kind of accidental one person coming up with disinformation. This was a intentional desire to try to support the narrative that the election was being stolen by chasing the states that turned out to be very close, right? Just to be clear, Maricopa County verified that the manufacturer of their machines actually like Sharpies. They like Sharpies because the ink does not come off when it's inside the scanner. And so ballpoint pens, sometimes the ink will come off and smear the scanner on the inside. Sharpies don't do that. Sharpies do bleed through the paper. But the manufacturers of these ballots, being not idiots and having done this before, when it bleeds through the paper, the circle is not on the place where you vote on the other side. And so if the scanner picks up on the other side, it disregards it because the oval is in a place that is not where you're recording a vote. So anyway, this is the kind of stuff we're seeing. It is not slowed down, it's actually sped up. So we're actually seeing a larger volume of people pushing completely invalid claims about the election since the election ended. And what's happening is it's kind of following the legal battle. So wherever there happens to be a legal battle, all of a sudden you'll see a burst of that's the place where lots of people are coming up, but it's the same themes over and over again. So we keep on finding these themes that we can look back and see were laid down during election day and then came up later. Now, the good side of the election is there's no evidence of any technical attack against the election infrastructure itself. That was a big concern coming out of 2016, is that different an agency related to the Russian government, Russian military intelligence specifically, broke into 21 different states in the run-up to the 2016 election, but then didn't do anything with it. So there's a question of whether or not this was if this was a dry run or if they were trying to effectively signal to the United States that they had this capability. But there had been breaches of election infrastructure in 2016. And there was a big question of whether this would repeat in 2020, except this time being much more damaging. Like I said, American elections are really weird. We do something that no other developed country does, which is we have 8,000 election authorities run our elections. So I'm here in Redwood City, San Mateo County. If the San Mateo County registrar is supported by the San Mateo County IT people, right? So like the local election systems are maintained by the IT people here in downtown Redwood City for San Mateo County. We have a sheriff's department, right? San Mateo County sheriffs, I've met a bunch of them, really nice guys, really smart, very effective. If somebody was breaking into my house, I know if I call 911, in 3 minutes, there'd be a sheriff's deputy out front and they would know what to do. But if the Chinese government flew a bomber overhead, I would not call the San Mateo County Sheriff's Department, right? We make actions by state adversaries, such as the armies and the navies and the air forces of other countries, generally a federal responsibility. But that's not how we handle security for elections. When it comes to the election, the equivalent of the San Mateo County Sheriff's Department, the IT people for San Mateo County, have to defend against the GRU, the SVR, the FSB from Russia, the People's Liberation Army, the Ministry of State Security from the People's Republic of China, the North Korean hackers in the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. And so you have this crazy mismatch where you have 8,000 election officials around the country who are supposed to stand up against potential hacking from some of the most skilled American adversaries and their hacking teams who are very, very, very good. And so this was a huge fear coming into 2020. Fortunately, there's no evidence of anything really bad happening there. A couple of things happened so that group, agency CISA and DHS did a really good job of working with the local and state election officials and doing a lot of security work with them. You had a bunch of states centralize their security function out of their counties, and at least at the state level. It's not going to go to the federal level, but they centralize at the state level, and they did a better job around IT. You saw people got rid of, most states got rid of what are called DRE systems, which are the electronic voting systems that have no paper backup. So in California, we have what are called, most people mark ballots themselves, right? If you're blind, if you don't speak the right language, if you have some kind of accessibility issue, you can vote on a computer, but what that computer does is it marks the ballot, right? And so it's very hard to rig an election that way, because even if you break into the computer, you have to mark hundreds or thousands of ballots incorrectly without getting caught if you want to actually swing an election. And so the move to paper backups means that any attacks against the election infrastructure are much less useful, because even if all the computer stuff gets broken, we have the paper and you can have people sit there and count the paper pieces, right, while you recover. That being said, something that didn't happen coming into this election that a lot of election security people asked for, including our team at Stanford, was a federal standard, what's called risk limiting audits. So one thing that a lot of election security experts really like is that after an election, no matter what the outcome, no matter whether it seemed to go fine or it didn't go fine, you randomly select thousands and thousands of ballots throughout the state, and you go and you verify everything was correct. And if you do this correctly, statistically, what you can do is you can verify that there's no way that the election could have been rigged be outside of the margin of error, right, or the margin of victory. And so it's called a risk limiting audit. It's something that is a good thing for states to do. It looks like Georgia is doing it now because the election is so close. They're deciding to do it. They don't have to. And so that's a smart thing. So they're going and they're auditing a bunch of random ballots and they're verifying, is this person alive? Do they actually, live there? Did they actually send in the ballot? Maybe you call them and make sure it was them. You verify that it's scanned correctly and that the vote was all correct and such. And if you do enough of those, then you have like a very good statistical model of, yes, this election, while there's fraud here, and there's a mistake here, here, and here, and here, and here, it's within this boundary, and therefore it statistically could not have affected more votes than X. That was not passed. There's a bill to pay for those and to require those at the federal level. The Article 2 of the United States Constitution gives Congress the ability to set the rules for elections for federal office. It cannot control how people do state offices, but it can set standards for federal office, including the presidency and the House of Representatives. But the Congress decided not to take that up. Senator Ron Wyden pushed that bill, and then Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell killed it. Unfortunately, that's why we're in the position we are right now, because that bill did not pass, to be honest. Hopefully now that both sides have felt that they got a little bit screwed in the election, we'll have some we'll have a little bit more bipartisanship around election security in the end. So anyway, that's where we are right now.
Great, Alex. Given that you're landing the plane as you're talking to us, that you're the pilot of the Election Integrity Partnership, we realize your time is really valuable. Some quick questions. Help us distinguish what's the difference between misinformation and disinformation.
That's a great question. So misinformation is information that's not correct that people are passing accidentally, right? So if somebody sees something and it's not right and they retweet it or they reshare it on Facebook, but they're not trying to be malicious, they're just sharing something that they didn't know was incorrect, that's misinformation. Disinformation is when you're trying to trick people intentionally. So it's really down to like the motivation of the person who speaks it.
Who are the biggest providers of disinformation and misinformation in this election?
It's all domestic. I mean, the majority of the election-related disinformation is coming from big influencers. So like one of the big changes after 2016 at the big tech companies was they've really cracked down on fake accounts. And so it's much harder to create a bot network of hundreds or thousands of fake Twitter or Facebook followers. That's gotten a lot harder. So we don't see people being able to inject something and then get thousands of people to retweet it. But what you do see is you'll have somebody with 1 million followers or 500,000 followers pick something up and then portray it as this is the truth, and then it will get organically reshared by all of those people over and over again.
So how would you compare the misinformation and disinformation activities in 2016 to those in 20? How have the trends changed?
Right. So in 2016, there was both domestic and foreign, but there's a lot of focus on the foreign disinformation. There's no good evidence that the foreign disinformation in 2016 actually had an impact on the election. In fact, there's a lot of quantitative social science evidence that points the other direction. That being said, we don't like foreigners messing with our elections, so we shouldn't just sit back and like it, even if we can't show quantitatively that it impacted anything. That being said, we have very little evidence of foreign interference this time. Like what happened in the run up to the election is there's a bunch of takedown of Russian, Chinese, Iranian, and North Korean assets. What looks like happening is NSA Cyber Command, which are the offensive capability of the US government and cyber, that they have broken into, they call it defending forward, which basically means breaking into the computers of our enemies and then figuring out what they're doing. They are reading the email of the Russians and figuring out what they're doing. And then they took that data and they gave it to the tech companies via the FBI. And then the tech companies were able to act to take a bunch of that down. And so that's been effective on the foreign. On domestic, it's much harder because we know who these people are. They're blue check marks. They're verified. But they're saying things that aren't true. And from a policy perspective, that's much harder for the companies because effectively they have to come up with rules that control the political speech of known American actors. It's a lot easier to say Russians can't speak in the American election. It's a lot harder to say this thing that a real American influencer is saying is not true.
So what about, what's the rate of actual fraudulent voting in, with signature verification of mail-in ballots? Is there any discernible fraudulent voting, of the mail-in ballots versus regular ballots?
So there's some evidence that there's slightly increased fraud with mail-in ballots, but it's really on the margins and it's nowhere near the numbers that we're talking about in this election. And so, there's 5 states that run mail-in balloting all the time. Oregon is mail-in only. You can't vote in person in Oregon. And in those states, while they have caught people and arrested them, there's never been an incident of an election being turned based upon mail-in vote fraud. You can't just mail a piece of paper in, right? To be clear, a person's registered, the ballot is tied to them cryptographically. There's a scan, a barcode that is on that ballot. That is tracked all the way through, and if there's voting patterns that are weird, that gets flagged by the computer for human review. Like if certain patterns are happening and when the ballots are sent in and stuff like that. So yes, it is possible there are people who vote for their elderly parents or vote for somebody who's dead. The voting for dead, don't do it. You will get caught eventually, right? That's actually I think the most common of the mail-in ballot is people get a ballot for somebody in their family who's died. They vote it. it's because upfront the registration rules aren't necessarily checked against different states do different things on the registration rules, but they often check later against the Social Security Death Index and other databases. And so if you get caught doing that, you will go to jail for a decent amount of time. And in fact, they found somebody doing that. Of course, it turns out the guy was a Trump voter, and he had his dead mom voted for Donald Trump in Pennsylvania. He is going to jail now. So it does happen, but like it also is expected that that kind of stuff evens out, that you have equal amounts of fraud on both sides. There's never been something that has been, a fraud and on the order of hundreds or thousands or tens of thousands of votes would be spectacularly difficult to pull off.
How much voter intimidation did you see around the country?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, we saw a decent amount of kind of social media posts, but they generally weren't seen by the audiences, right? One of the fears people had was that you would have intimidation at polling places. Like there's a lot of fear of, because we had these protests, that people were burning guns, that people were like coming and doing counter protests and stuff. And almost none of that happened. Part of the positive thing that happened this year was not just the mail-in voting, but the early voting, right? So more and more states are moving to being able to vote over a 2-week period. And so if you smear out the voting over 2 weeks, then there's not like a really specific incident for somebody to come try to disrupt.
So why was there less disinformation from foreigners and misinformation in 2020 versus 2016?
I think because of the cooperation between the tech companies and the government. So the government's job is to go find the professional actors, and the tech company's job is to make it harder to create fake accounts and then to take information from the government and shut them down. There was a massive takedown of a Russian troll farm. The people that we dealt with, an organization that used to be called the Internet Research Agency. It has some kind of different Russian name now. And there was a big takedown of, this time it was mostly on the left, of a bunch of fake accounts that had been created in fake personas. And that looks like it was a cooperation between the government and Facebook and Twitter. There was also equivalent takedowns of China and Iran and such. There's also direct disruption activity by the NSA. They have not specified, but effectively they broke their stuff in the days before Election Day, started deleting computers, turning off networks, stuff like that in these countries.
How big is your staff, and how would you measure, give me the metrics of success for what you're doing?
So between the 4 institutions, we have 120 people working on this EIP. About half of that is from Stanford. I had to hire 30 new students just for this project. But we have 120 people overall. We've handled close to 1,000 incidents. Each incident could be one piece of disinformation, but generally it's dozens and dozens of the same thing posted over and over again. So we have something like 10,000 pieces of disinformation in our database now. Our metrics coming in was around whether we thought we could be effective in finding and stopping stuff before it went hyper viral. And in most cases, that's true. One of the problems here is that we have the ability to find and point out stuff. We don't have the ability to actually take it down or get it labeled or the like, which makes our metrics a little bit dependent on how the platforms themselves operate. The other thing that we're now doing is that we will be writing a kind of thorough report of everything we saw, as well as the kind of policy recommendations of what both the companies can do and what we can do from a legal perspective to be better prepared for 2022 and 2024.
So what's your funding source, Alex, for the 120 people that you have working in the Election Integrity Partnership?
Yeah, so we have a bunch of like private foundations, the kind of people that pay money, Newmark Foundation, John S. Knight, the kind of people that fund things at Stanford.
Total annual budget size of your activity?
I'm not going to share that.
Great. So thank you very much for taking time in such an incredibly busy period of your work week right now to share with the Wednesday Auditing Luncheon what you're doing at the Election Integrity Partnership. We're all impressed with how thoughtfully you are doing your best as a citizen and as an organization of citizens to keep integrity in our election. Thanks so much for being our guest. And with that, we'll let you get back to work, Alex. Thanks, buddy.
Yeah, thanks. Hopefully see everybody at the club back when it reopens.